There's an old proverb. It says, good news from a faraway place is like a cool drink of water when you are hot and thirsty. Welcome to Construction Genius. My name is Eric Anderton, and today we have a cool drink of water for you. My guest is Curt Rocca. He is the managing partner of DCA Partners. DCA is a leading provider of growth and transactional services to closely held and family-owned companies throughout the Western United States. They also provide expansion and buyout capital to growth-oriented companies led by talented management teams. Curt and I have a wonderful conversation that is designed to help you think through the various scenarios that you may be facing with your business as we go through the ups and downs of the current economic situation. The challenges you face may be unique to your company, but they're not unique in the history of business. And Curt and I look at practical examples of companies that have succeeded in dire circumstances and have gone on to thrive as they've addressed the challenges they face with creativity, with resilience, and with a real fundamental commitment to who they are as an organization. You're going to really enjoy this conversation. Please give us a rating or a review wherever you get your podcasts. Make it a 5-star review. Share the podcast with other people. If you have feedback for me, contact me on my website, ericanderton.com. You can also reach out to me on LinkedIn. Just search for Eric Anderton and you'll find me. And also, I want you to know that there are a couple of resources in the show notes. There's a link to Curt's website. They currently have a fund available for companies that are looking to expand and grow. So feel free to contact them directly, dcapartners.com. And there's also a free tool that you can use to help with your scenario planning. And you need to take advantage of this tool. It's very simple and straightforward. Curt has provided it to the listeners of Construction Genius. So thank you to Curt for that. You don't even have to sign up for it. You just click the link in the show notes, download the Google Doc. It's all yours. I know you're going to enjoy it. Again, my name is Eric Anderton. Thank you for listening to Construction Genius. Really appreciate your support. Continue to listen to the show. And like I said earlier, share it with other people. Enjoy my interview here now with Curt. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Curt, welcome to the show. I'm so glad that you've taken time to join us here today.
Eric, thank you for having me. I'm honored and flattered that you invited me.
Well, I did so for a reason, because your company, DCA, has a track record of really helping entrepreneurs to achieve their lifelong goals. And I know as we go through the current crisis, as we're recording this late April of 2020, the COVID crisis that we're facing, you've gone through a number of different business cycles throughout your career. And as you look at the way entrepreneurs operate their businesses and the way they deal with the situations and the crises that they face, what in your mind does it mean to be a realistic optimist?
Boy, that's a great question, Eric. I think, a realistic optimist is someone that is honest with themselves and their teams about the challenges that they're facing in the short run, but doesn't let the weight of those challenges keep them from being able to think creatively and look beyond the horizon to be able to capitalize on the opportunities that are likely to come out of whatever near-term challenges that they're facing. And not only see that for themselves, but be able to communicate that effectively and to embolden their teams to retain the energy and the enthusiasm that is required to get through a tough time by virtue of the fruits that are likely to come of those labors down the road. So in my mind, that's a realistic optimist.
Okay, so there's a number of words there and phrases, ideas I'd like to unpack. I think one that a lot of people have felt in the past 45 days, particularly the folks that I work with in construction, construction was just going along. Everyone was thinking, wow, this is awesome. And then all of a sudden, boom, overnight, for most folks, a lot changes. How have you seen successful entrepreneurs, how do they go about bearing that weight, that idea of the weight of the responsibility that they have? How do you see folks successfully bearing that?
I think it's different for different people, right? I think making sure that they actually carve out time to think
Mm.
I think the one thing is, when we all get in a crisis mode, we tend to want to work more, work harder. And
Mm.
unfortunately, as most people I think would relate to, sometimes the harder you work, the less creative you become because you get more myopic, you get more task oriented. And while there certainly are a lot of tasks that need to take place and be kind of checked off the checklist, the real value, especially at leaders of these organizations, comes in having your head up and looking at the horizon and understanding what changes you can make from a strategic level, and then enlisting the team members and the lieutenants, if you will, to actually do a lot of the blocking and tackling.
So that's interesting. So a leader of a company has to be able to separate him or herself from the immediate sort of battlefield situation and begin to think above that and understand what's most important and be able to delegate that to their folks to be able to execute.
Now more than ever, because the between the communication, the leadership, the vision, the creativity, the pivots that need to take place, you can't do that if you're head down, focused myopically on one given issue. Someone needs to be surveying the landscape, assessing, reading, just reading. In a time like what we're going through now, one of the big questions that I think are on a lot of people's minds are not only what are the near-term implications of when is the economy going to open back up, what are my workforce safety requirements likely to be, what is my liability relative to people working from home, relative to people that might come in and get sick in the workplace. All those things are important issues, and they need to have people within each organization focus on each one of those issues. But the other is, what are the longer term systemic implications that this pandemic is likely to have, not just the pandemic, but the economic fallout from the pandemic, I was likely to have on my industry and my company's future. And it's the old Wayne Gretzky quote, right? What made Wayne Gretzky such a great hockey player is because he was always skating to where the puck was going to be. And I think that's what leaders need to be doing now, is assessing their landscapes, understand not where the puck has been in the past, not where the puck is today, but where is the puck likely to be 6 months, 12 months, 5 years from now.
You mentioned there this idea of reading, which I love. What would you recommend a CEO or someone in a senior leadership position be reading at the moment to be able to have that kind of Wayne Gretzky perspective?
Anything but the news.
There you go.
I mean, I say that only slightly sarcastically. I mean, one of my great frustrations right now is the fact that it's hard to find news, right? You watch, no matter what, whether it's on the internet, which is obviously being funneled to you based on what you've clicked on in the past, and so what you wind up seeing is that you're just getting your existing beliefs or your existing perspectives validated, right? Because there's all this artificial intelligence that's feeding each one of us what we want to hear, right? And you get the same thing on broadcast, in the broadcast media. And so I think, it's really hard to get a balanced perspective anymore by reading the news. So I would say go directly to sources. Go to the CDC, go to the National Institute of Health, go to those types of places if you really want to get a sense for where things are going. The other area that I would say is valuable to go to would be, trade organizations. Tap into the trade organizations in your industry. And the unfortunate thing is trade organizations have a natural optimistic bias. I rarely take them at face value, but I do believe that they are the best source for compiling meaningful data.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I know the associations I'm involved in, like the AGC of California and the Sacramento Regional Builders Exchange, because they're in the Sacramento region, they do have their finger on the pulse of the political situation. And so that can be extremely helpful in terms of their responsiveness to the industry, the issues that affect the industry, but also gathering information from elected officials in terms of where things may be going. I'm curious, this idea of creativity. As an entrepreneur, as a leader of an organization, what advice do you have to help someone to be thinking creatively, both as an individual leader and as an executive team? What are some key things as far as that's concerned?
Again, I think when you become really task-oriented, when you feel the weight of your situation on you, it's almost important physiologically or psychologically to be creative.
Yeah.
And honestly, The people that I've known who have been the best examples of this in very difficult situations are those that have some form of really solid spiritual or functional grounding. They are very purpose driven. And I think understanding what your purpose is and reminding yourself of that constantly and not getting mired down by the details is a huge component of being able to remain creative.
I think that's interesting because one of the things I'm finding as I'm talking to my clients is how key it is for them to remain grounded in their purpose and their values, because their strategy in the near and the long term may be changing radically, and even the markets that they're in can be changing, but who they are as people and who they are as a company, that solid foundation can really help them with that creative process that you're describing there.
No, I think that's exactly right. And not only those, but who are their customers? Who are their constituents? And what are their problems? And what are they trying to solve? Yeah. And I think that's one of the other things that people can do to really keep mission focused is to stay not only close to your employees, but stay ultra close and communicate at a more meaningful level with your customers. Yep. Because most of your customers are going through the similar types of stress in terms, it may be different issues, but the same magnitude of stress that you and your organization are going through. And having real adult conversations with them about what they're worried about and how you can help. I think one of the unfortunate byproducts of being in a crisis situation is people have a tendency to start looking inward and worrying about ourselves. I mean, we get into survival mode, right? But the best way for most companies to survive is to help their customers to get into a better place, right? Help your employees get to a better place, help your customers get to a better place. And if you can force yourself to stay focused, and that's what I mean by being mission focused, force yourself to focus on how you can help other people as opposed to how those other people can help you, is likely to have a long-term, not only in the near term, a better impact on the results, but almost certainly a better long-term impact on the relationships that matter the most.
Okay, so let me just highlight that because that's fundamental here. This idea of getting closer to your customers, not being insular, but getting to know them even better in this crisis and asking how can you help to get them to a better place? And really having that outward-looking perspective of how can I help others? I think that's fundamental to the whole process there.
I agree with that completely.
Let me ask you this, though. I know a lot of the work that you do with your clients is in terms of scenario planning, projections, forecasts, things like that. And I know that at the moment it is fundamental for the leadership of organizations to be getting out of the weeds, getting out of the firefighting, and getting into the mode of what's going to happen in the future and thinking through various scenarios. Now, we're in the midst of a great deal of uncertainty. There's still a lot of fogginess. But what advice would you have for a company in terms of being effective in their scenario planning?
That's another great question, Eric. It's, I think one of the things that we saw, in the Great Recession of, whatever year you want to pick, 2008, 9, 10, whenever, was that people went into that being more optimistic about what the future was likely to look like. And so they wound up not cutting deeply enough, quickly enough. And so my advice to people who are doing scenario planning is to put together your initial plan, right? But then say, okay, define upfront, what are the triggers that are going to cause you to take another look at that plan? And those can be positive triggers when you want to add, something back, or they can be negative triggers where you need to cut further or you need to modify something else about your business. And every business is going to be different, and each of those triggers is going to be different, and the implications that are prompted by each of those triggers is clearly going to be different. But what winds up happening, unfortunately, is people kind of often will come up with a plan, and then it just becomes this slippery slope, right? It's like, well, it was only a little bit worse than last month, and it was only a little bit worse than last week, and it was only a little bit, and you have these incremental degradations that happen that compound over time. And all of a sudden you realize that if you look at just the starting point and the ending point, you fell off a cliff, but it didn't feel like it. It felt like you were going down a slide. And so defining specific points along that slide where you want to make a reassessment and a readjustment to what your plan is, I think is critical.
Yeah, it's interesting. Hemingway said that bankruptcy happens in two ways, gradually and then suddenly. So in terms of the scenario planning itself, how far out would you recommend a company goes with their scenario planning?
I think right now, I think they need to go out to the end of the year. I mean, the most important thing obviously is cash, right? And I was talking to a prominent banker of a local bank recently, and he said what they're asking their clients to do is say, look, if shelter in place were to continue right through the balance of the year, and we all hope and pray that that's not the case, right? But just if you want to start with, okay, what is the worst case scenario possible? I think we would agree that probably is it. And just say if under that scenario, based on your creativity, how long could you make it from a cash perspective? And start with that. Right. And then, cash clearly is number one. Understanding what does your pipeline look like? What does your backlog look like? Revenue, gross margin implications. Are there, their near-term implications? Are there long-term implications to the gross margin? They're likely to come about as a result of that. Your operating costs. What are the implications? I was talking to someone yesterday. All of a sudden there, regulations. She goes, I never thought I would see the day that we are actually sanitizing tractors. They literally are sanitizing the farm equipment. I mean, whoever thought that would be, a requirement.
So right now, cash is king.
Well, no question. I mean, whenever there's a crisis, cash is king. I mean, liquidity, it's all about liquidity. And when I say cash, it's really a function of cash as well as, your availability on any kind of credit facility that you would have. I think the other thing that people don't pay enough attention to, again, because they unfortunately are the optimist, but not necessarily the realistic optimist, is not paying enough attention to the collectability of their accounts receivable, both in terms of how long their customers may stretch them out and still be able to pay them, or back to your Hemingway quote relative to bankruptcy, are there companies that historically have been very, very strong that you never would have worried about? They've been longstanding customers. You've perhaps stopped in your judicious credit management policies, and you may be at risk. So I would encourage everybody to look very diligently about their credit management policies and their current accounts receivable.
Okay, so you got to be diligent with your cash. You've got to look at your pipeline or your backlog. You've got to think about the gross margins that you're operating with, your operating costs. And I think that idea of the collectability of the accounts receivable, what strategies would you encourage companies to adopt in terms of maximizing their opportunity to get that accounts receivable in their hands as opposed to in the hands of their clients?
I think I would be smart about, you have certain people that are going to be just fine. And so I wouldn't get too aggressive with those people other than, again, focus on what their needs are. In this time, I think we would all agree we have fewer people asking us how they can help us than we do trying to ask us how they can. More people are spending time figuring out how other people can help them get through this than they are trying to figure out how they can help other people. So if you take that approach, I think that's a nice starting point. You can't always end there, but it's at least a nice first volley. Right. But I think also I would suggest, offer discounts, offer prompt pay discounts, find a way to make paying you a priority. Because they're all, if a company's struggling, they are sitting there every week trying to figure out who to pay and who not to pay.
Yeah.
And you need to figure out a way, and it's probably hand-to-hand combat for a lot of them, as opposed to having one strategic blanket that you can overlay over all of it. Try to understand what they're trying to accomplish and whether or not there's something you can offer them that would cause them to pay you more promptly. And then I think the other thing is to accelerate your accounts receivable aging review policies. And not let someone get 30 days past due before you actually start your follow-up. Try to rein them in, make sure that you're being proactive.
So let me ask you this. When it comes to these, a couple of things I want to ask you about. The first one is this idea of the scenario planning. Plan out to the end of the year. Start with the worst case scenario. How many different scenarios would you recommend somebody think through? How far do they have to go?
I would say right now people don't have time to think of more than one.
Okay.
for the most part.
Okay.
But what I would suggest you do is say, okay, again, what are my triggers
Yes.
that are going to cause me to need to come back and redo it?
Yes.
Right. So I think that's the more important part, is what is my trigger where I feel like I can start adding fuel back? And what is my trigger when I need to contract more? And
Right.
if you can have that, but also not just know what those triggers are, but know what the actions are that those are going to prompt, right? So if it's I'm rebuilding now, what are the first actions that I believe I'm going to do as soon as I can?
Yes.
And then same on the other side, if I need to contract further, where are the points of high leverage where I can get the most bang for the buck on the contraction side?
Okay. So that's fundamental there, is making sure you have those triggers in place so you avoid that slippery slope, but then also thinking through what actions you need to take once those triggers occur, whether positive or negative. So then let me ask you about this idea of creativity. As a senior executive or the CEO of the company, again, you're feeling that weight, and yet you have this pool of talent in your organization to help you with this creative process. What advice do you have for the CEO or the senior executive as he or she is coming into a creative problem-solving meeting? What sort of mindset should they have? How should they show up as they go into that meeting?
Another good question. You've got to be optimistic and looking at your current situation as an opportunity. Once you start thinking about it from a, how am I going to survive, the world, once you feel like the walls are closing in on you, you're pretty much done, right? Because none of us have creativity in that environment. It's just not in it. Now, we're all, or at least most people, are probably going to feel that from time to time,
right,
as we go through this. And in some places, in our homes, those walls literally feel like they're closing in on us. But
yeah,
think about people who are in the restaurant business. Those people, what they've done to pivot their business models almost instantaneously to figure out how they're going to continue to sort of tread water long enough that they're going to be there to fight another day on the back end of this. Now, those people, their world is not going to change once the governor says you can go back and eat in restaurants.
right.
They're already talking about lower density levels, increased safety. So their costs are going to go up. Their throughput is going to go down. So their entire business model and their whole store design is probably going to be completely redone. And so those people are going to need creativity for the next 2 to 3 years.
So it's interesting, this idea of, it's almost as if the executive, he or she has to have that conversation with themselves before they go into the meeting and be grounded in that fundamental perspective that we are going to identify who our customers are. If we don't know already, or if we're going into a new market, we're going to get to as close to them as possible. And we're going to ask this one question: how can we help them?
Perfectly stated. And then look at the entire situation, irrespective of what the scenario is, and say, what is the opportunity here?
Yes. Yes.
What is the opportunity here? And there always is an opportunity. And it's an opportunity in some cases, I hate to say it, in some cases, organizations are looking at this as an opportunity to top grade their talent pool.
Yes.
Right. And they're saying, oh, you know what? We probably did get a little bit fat. And we probably did have some excesses because we could. Well, now's the time to make ourselves better. I think we've all learned to communicate much better remotely.
Yes.
Right? There's going to be some opportunity that comes out of that. So in every business, there's opportunity that otherwise wouldn't have been exposed had this circumstance not happen. And I think going into every situation with that mindset, I loved your term of, having that self-talk and convincing. One of my old bosses said, the first sale you have to make is yourself.
That's right.
It's incredibly true across a broad spectrum of applications, but I think it certainly applies here. And if the leader can't sell themselves and doesn't genuinely believe that there is an opportunity tied up in some of this adversity, then they're never going to be able to sell their teams. They're never going to be able to sell their customer on how wonderful the world is going to be on the back end of this. And let's face it, there's plenty of doom and gloom negativity. Not very many people are looking for more of that.
Yes.
And so whatever the circumstances are, there are always going to be challenges. They're different today. They're probably more extreme and more concentrated today for a lot of businesses. Challenge and opportunity are just flip sides of the same coin, right? And so you can look at it and focus on the challenges, or you can focus on the opportunities. And I think the people who are going to come out of this better are going to be the ones that are focusing on the opportunities, or addressing the challenges through the lens of, what do I need to do to make sure I'm still around to capitalize and well positioned to capitalize on those opportunities once they become more evident.
There's this sort of the stick-to-itiveness, there's this fundamental commitment to being in business and being a business, and regardless of what happens, we're going to work through these challenges. We're going to do whatever we need to do to maintain the company as we go through the hard times, with that lens of seizing opportunity and coming out of it stronger as opposed to weaker. It's interesting to me, though, I know you've worked with many companies over the years. Can you speak to an example of a company that was deeply struggling, either because of external circumstances or internal circumstances, and maybe you even thought, dude, these guys are done, but they managed to sort of right the ship, turn themselves around, and come back out on the other side?
Yeah, unfortunately, our last fund, we invested 100% of our capital between 2005 and 2007. That's when we invested in, which means we went through 2008 through 2012 with every single one of them. So I got plenty of those kinds of stories. The two, though, that are most impressive to me, and I don't think either of them would mind me sharing their stories, by name.
Sure.
One is Kovars, which many people know is a large martial arts studio, primarily here in the Sacramento region. They do a little bit in the Bay Area. They had embarked on a national expansion. They had a number of leases. And in 2008, as you can imagine, discretionary income went down considerably. Fewer people were looking at martial arts training as a priority. They were as impacted as most industries. And they had to pivot and figure out how they were going to go through it. And I think what got them through it as much as anything was frankly, it was the martial arts training, the discipline that they have, the fact that everything is about character, everything is about doing the right thing. And they never strayed from their principles and their training, and they worked their way through it. Even when they had to have very hard conversations with vendors. They had to have even harder conversations with landlords, but they never varied from the things that made them special and made them who they were. And they preserved that culture, and they preserved their integrity at every step along the way. And then they figured out creatively how to pivot their business to be more affordable. They did online training. They did things for health and wellness programs. They started training other martial arts studios. Mm-hmm. Right? It's like, okay, if the students won't come, well, we know we have recognized around the world as one of the best studios. Let's leverage that. And so Yep. they just tried to find, again, they figured out who else is in pain and how can I help them, or who else has something that they're looking to enjoy in the case of other students. So
that's excellent.
That was one great example. The other one is a large HVAC contractor. It used to be known as Butler Heating and Air. Now it's known as Velara.
Yeah.
You know those guys.
Yeah, they're a great company.
They went from, I don't remember what the numbers were anymore. I used to, 2,000 employees down to like 240.
That was hardcore.
Can you imagine?
Hardcore.
And they did it. They did not lose a single member of their senior management team.
Yeah.
They kept them all together. They all made the sacrifices. They all led with a distinct purpose, but they were also incredibly creative. They found new revenue sources. They sold off. Part of the reason they're not known as Butler anymore is because they sold off their service division, and as part of that service division, the buyers bought the Butler name. And They had a period of time, and they changed it now. They're now known as Velara. They did that, and they actually worked with the California Energy Commission to come up with a new financing program for energy efficiency improvements, right? They came up with a new financing program, and if it wasn't for that new financing program, they would have had a harder time selling air conditioning units. They were doing solar. They were doing all kinds of energy efficiency home improvements. And while they're not in that business anymore, it built them a bridge during the deepest part of that chasm such that between that and the sale of their service division and a couple of other elements, they were able to build a bridge to the other side of the chasm. And now the company is more successful than they've ever been. And I can tell you how much respect I have for the CEO there and the entire management team there, because they did all the things. A lot of the answers that I'm giving to you today are examples of what I saw them do as they were going through one of the most difficult times that I can imagine any company ever going through.
That's tremendous. The CEO, that's Rick Wiley, right?
He is. Yep.
Yeah. That's another example of someone who's kind of grounded in a certain perspective on life and brings that to the table in his business.
Yep. How he stayed creative with all those, talk about a scenario where you have a lot of walls coming in at you. I mean, their revenue went down dramatically.
Dude.
And they still had the infrastructure. They still had all the fixed infrastructure. He never once stopped being one of the most creative people I've ever known.
That's beautiful. It's interesting, just this idea that you have here, because I think in the next few months, some folks might be thinking this, but what do you need to do to build the bridge to get over the chasm? And you may need to make, I think this is going to be a challenge for some folks, is maintaining the core fundamental principles that drive their business, and yet making short-term tactical decisions that are going to get them from where they are to where they need to be. They may not be permanent decisions, but nevertheless, they are necessary decisions if the company is going to survive.
Yeah, the only other thing I would say as it relates to that, and it ties back to the people that didn't cut deeply enough or quickly enough, is as the economy started to turn and people started to have things that they wanted to do and investments that made sense for them to make. I can't tell you how many of them found themselves in a position of looking back and saying, God, you know what? I pissed away $400,000 in the first 90 days of this thing because I was holding on too long. And it's like, God, I could sure use that $400,000 today. If I had that $400,000 back now, look at what I could do. And so I would just really encourage people to think about that every dollar you spend today is a dollar you're not going to have to be able to reinvest in building your business, on the back end of this.
See, that's fundamental right there. So there has to be a degree of humility there to be able to say, this dollar that we're spending is not the right dollar to be spending right now. Perhaps, I've got to let go of my wish dream or my baby or however you want to put it, but it's fundamental if the company is going to be able to survive and I have the cash necessary to take advantage of opportunities that occur in the future.
Exactly right.
Okay, so as we're wrapping up here, Curt, I really appreciate your time. What are some actions that you would recommend CEOs to take in the next 30 days to ensure that 12 months from now, they're in a healthy position? Just summarize some takeaways for the folks as they're listening to this episode.
I think it's, number one is manage cash.
Yep.
And do that contingency planning that you were talking about. Run your income statement out for the next 12, at least through the end of this year, right?
Yep.
Through the end of 2020. And don't do it just for your income statement, do it for your balance sheet. I would aggressively manage your accounts receivable. I would make myself as visible as I possibly could with every one of my employees and every one of my key customers. Yep. and really understand what they're worried about and how I can help them.
That's excellent.
And I think if you stay focused on your customers, focused on your employees, understand what's your cash position and aggressively manage the cash position, manage your costs to preserve the cash so that you do have it on the back end of this. And I think companies that do that, and also understand what your bookings are, right? Look at your book to bill ratio. How much of your backlog are you burning off?
Yep.
Sometimes people look at their revenue and they get a false sense of security because they're not looking at their book to bill ratio.
Yep.
And it's like all of a sudden, all they're doing is selling off of or earning revenue off of past successes.
Yeah.
They're not refilling the top of the funnel. And so make sure you're looking at all aspects of your sales cycle, because sales cycles, that's another thing we haven't talked about, but sales cycles are likely to get elongated.
Yes.
And in fact, in most industries already are.
Yes.
And so you're going to have a gap in your bookings probably, and you're going to have a gap in your revenue recognition as those sales cycles continue to elongate.
Yeah, and I see that particularly in construction as a fundamental mindset shift that has to happen, because a lot of contractors have been pushing away work the last couple of years because they've been overwhelmed, and they've been communicating that to their business development people. And so their business development people are a little gun shy bringing opportunities to the table. But now is the time to be filling the top of that funnel with as much activity as you can, because that's going to be essential to, you've got to identify as many opportunities now so that you can convert that into actual work in the future.
Yeah, absolutely right.
Okay, so I just want to end on this note then. By the way, you have offered to provide the listeners a particular resource that you use with your clients, a spreadsheet, the COVID planning tool.
If it's helpful to people, there's nothing wildly proprietary to it, so they're all certainly more than
Excellent.
welcome to.
Yeah, no, it's very straightforward. So what I'm going to do is I'll put a link in the show notes to that tool, and so you'll be able to download that if you'd like to use it. And I'm also going to put a link to Curt's website. We're not going out to restaurants these days. We're doing takeout. What's the one takeout place that you've been going back to again and again?
There's a little Italian place near our home, and they make one of the best lasagnas that I've had in a long time. Viano Trattoria in Granite Bay.
Viano?
Viano. V-A-I-A-N-O.
V-A-I-A-N-O Trattoria in Granite Bay.
And of course, the other one is Jack's Urban Eats.
Jack's.
That's so when I go to get lasagna one day and go to Jack's and get my favorite salad the next. So between those two, we're sort of bouncing back and forth.
Hey, shout out, by the way, for me. We've been going to Zelda's, Midtown, and then we went to Leatherby's. Can't forget Leatherby's. If you're in Sacramento, you can't forget Leatherby's. Keep supporting them, guys.
Well, while we're doing plugs, I think the other one I would throw out that the rest of my family is certainly, number one fan. Every time one of the kids comes home, it's Mikuni. And that's another great one. I mean, talk about someone who's done a great job of pivoting their business model. I think Jax has done a great job of that. Mikuni has done a great job of that. So hats off to all the restaurateurs out there and hotel owners who are swinging hard and working hard and doing the best they can to keep people safe and take care of their employees.
Right on. Awesome. Well, Curt, I really appreciate your time. I've enjoyed this conversation. Tremendous takeaways for the audience here. And of course, in the show notes will be the link to that spreadsheet. People can use that as a template to help them with their scenario planning. So I appreciate your generosity and the contribution your company's made to the community over the years here.
No, Eric, thanks for having us. And I think the only thing I would say too, you asked about building the bridge, to the extent that there are companies out there that are looking to add to the length of that bridge that have a need for capital in excess of what the PPP program or some of the SBA or other lending programs have available. Hopefully feel free to reach out to us through that same link, and we'd be happy to have a conversation with them.
Excellent. So I will link to your website in the show notes, and they do have some capital available for companies. Feel free to contact them. They're an awesome company to work with. Curt, really appreciate your time here today.
Thanks for having me, Eric.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Construction Genius. Hope you found that 1% of inspiration to help you in the next few days. If you like the show, please give us a 5-star review on iTunes, share it with other construction leaders who you think would benefit, and always remember that the show is brought to you by Kick-Ass Meetings. I've been working with construction leaders since 2004, teaching them how to run extremely effective problem-solving meetings that gets their people collaborating, taps into their creativity. And to get yourself a free copy of the Kick-Ass Meeting Report, go to www.ericanderton.com/kickassmeetings. Grab yourself that free report, read it, use it in your business. You'll find it extremely useful. And thanks again for listening.